Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to play around with this Bottle Brush Trees stamp set. I've had it for a while, but it's just sat there and I haven't actually pulled it out yet. So I'm going to do that today. Now, the first thing I'm doing is I got two new Brilliance metallic ink pads, and I wanted to show you a tip. If you get these pads that have those clear covers, you don't want to throw those covers away because they help your pad from drying out. So the easiest way to keep them and not have to worry about losing them, and also not even need to think about them after that first time, is putting two pop dots at the top, closing the lid, and then that clear cover usually sticks to the lid. This is the first time I've ever had one cause a problem, but there's an easy fix to it. I'll pull that clear cover off, put it into the lid and center it, and then I'll push that down so that it sticks to that lid. And then every single time I close my pad, it will cover that pad, protect it from drying out, and I have that for those two. I've done this with every single pad I've had that has had those clear covers, and it works. You never have to even think about them again, and you also forget that they're actually there. It's just a way of stretching your supplies, making sure they last longer. I know many people that didn't know that those were important and threw those away, and their pad ended up drying out a lot quicker than if you keep them. So once you have that done, you can start stamping away. I'm using the Galaxy Gold Brilliance pad as well as the Starlight Silver Brilliance pad. I wanted to just do a card where I'm mixing some metallics, and this is not something I normally do. Normally I stick with one metallic tone and carry it throughout the card, but I was curious and wanted to see how it would look to have a card with some different metallics on there, and I actually really love how they look. So these two Brilliance pads here are a pigment pad, and either you want to use a heat gun to heat set them or put some clear embossing powder on them and then use a heat tool. You can let them dry on their own, but it takes a long time, and it really depends on the paper you use, how much of each of the ink pads you use, or how much ink you use. And these ones were brand new, so they're really, really juicy. Easiest way for me was to put clear embossing powder on top of them and heat set it. That way you get the dimension of the embossing powder as well as the shine from it. So now I'm grabbing my third stamp here, and for this one I'm going to use a rose gold embossing powder. So I have some clear Versamark ink here, and I've just re-inked this pad to make it nice and juicy. I am still going to stamp it a couple times because I am stamping near some dimension of embossing. I want to make sure to get some good ink on there as well as good pressure. Now, like I said, I did just re-ink this pad, and it's another one of those ways that you can stretch your supplies. A lot of stamp pads have re-inkers available, and it's kind of like having a car but not buying the gas. If you have the car or the stamp pad, you want to just buy the gas for it rather than having to buy a new car every single time. And if your pad happens to be able to be or have one that you can buy the re-inkers for it, it's nice to have them on hand, so when you notice your pad drying out a little bit, you can add a little bit. If you have it on hand, you tend to not let your pad go completely dry. And once you get used to having a re-inker for those pads that you have that have re-inkers, you'll tend to look for pads that you can get re-inkers for so that you don't ever have to have a dry pad that you have to go replace. So I'm taking that gold Brilliance ink and I'm stamping a sentiment onto black cardstock. And I love that with these metallic pigment inks, you can do that easily on dark cardstock. They show up really, really well. Once again, I'm going to put that clear embossing powder over top of it to heat set that in. You could stamp with Versamark and then use gold and silver embossing powder. It would give a similar look, but not quite exactly the same. There's something different about using a metallic ink pad with clear powder that just gives a bit of a different look. So here is another way to stretch your supplies. I used that rose gold embossing powder for one of the trees on the front, and I wanted to mat my card image piece with rose gold, but I don't have any rose gold embossing powder. So an easy solution is to use a Versamark pad, ink just around the edges of that cardstock, and then heat emboss it. Now I have inked probably about a ½ inch in. I know when I've cut my layers, I'm going to do about a ¼ inch reveal for that mat. So I want to make sure that I emboss enough so that I have that whole mat there, but I don't need to emboss that entire piece of paper. Everything in the front of it or in that center part of it is going to be covered by the my image piece on the front of my card. So it's going to be a waste of embossing powder and a waste of my time to emboss that entire thing. But this is a great way if you have a unique colored ink or a unique colored embossing powder and want to add some continuity to your card and use it in a bit of a different way. This is a great way to stretch that supply and have your mat completely perfectly match your image piece. This particular rose gold embossing powder is slightly darker than some of the rose gold cardstocks that I've seen, so I wouldn't be able to match it exactly, as well as the fact that my local store didn't have any in stock, so I would have had to wait for probably weeks for some to come in. I live in Canada, and often it takes a little while for things to come in if they're not already in stock in the store. So this is a great way to not have to wait, to be able to match my mat with my stamped image perfectly, and another way to stretch those supplies. Now I put 2 layers on here. That first layer is a little bit blotchy, and by adding a second layer, it just smooths it out. You get more of a continuous color on here. So I'm taking my image piece and I'm just cutting it down. I'm going to put this on a white card base. My mat that I did the embossing around the outside of is 4 inches by 5 1/4. And then my image piece there is 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I'm going to assemble those onto the front of the card. And then as I'm assembling them, I'm thinking there's just something else that I want to add to it. There's something missing. And I already have one other element that I had planned on here, but it just didn't seem to be enough. But I still have this base of this card assembled while I'm coming up with a solution. So I always like to put an acrylic block on those pieces while they're drying, just to keep them nice and flat. I have my sentiment here. I'm going to use my mini trimmer to cut it out, and I love this mini trimmer for this exact purpose. With that mini trimmer, the clear protective thing is smaller, and I just find I have so much more control when I'm cutting small mini sentiments. For the rest of this black piece here, I had already planned to take this Santa and Sleigh die from the Simon Snowglobe set and cut that out. So I cut it out, and then I ended up choosing to use the house die from it as well, and creating a little house for the front of the card. The main reason for this is when I have my sentiment with black and then the Santa and Sleigh in black, there's 2 elements that are black and it just looks a little odd. There's a little rule of 3s when it comes to creating, or really a rule of odd numbers, and I just needed another element that was black. So I took some gold cardstock and cut that house. I took some black cardstock to cut the roof, and then I just used a piece of glitter scrap cardstock for some snow on the roof. I'm also using white cardstock pieces that are die cut for the door and the window, and I'm gluing those on. When I'm gluing them, I'm using a pair of reverse tweezers to hold the die cuts, and then I have some Barely Art glue here that I'm gluing everything together with in a really tiny squeeze bottle, and it makes it nice and easy to get in really detailed areas. So I'm gluing all of those pieces onto the front of that card, using those tweezers to help place everything. And I love those tweezers because they're reverse grip. When you're holding onto them, you don't need to squeeze them to be grabbing those die cuts. You only need to squeeze to let go of them, and it makes it nice and easy to control. If you happen to lose control of it, you don't lose the die cut on there. So I have some gel pens here, and I'm using them to put some metallic accents on my Santa and Sleigh silhouette. This is not something that you'd necessarily need to do, but I wanted to tie in those metallics a little bit more, as well as the fact that it just adds a little bit of sparkle. One of these pens is a glitter pen, so it adds some metallic, some sparkle, and just makes that die cut really pop, basically. This is a really easy trick to do, and those gel pens are very inexpensive. So the last way that you can stretch your supplies is I'm taking an embossing pen and I am making that front door rose gold. It just, same with the rule of 3s with that black, I needed something else that was rose gold. I have that tree, I have my mat, and there just seemed to need to be something else. But rather than making some cardstock rose gold, and I've already addressed that I didn't have any, easy enough to color that die cut with an embossing pen and use that same embossing powder. So here is the finished card. I really love the look of those mixed metals, and it was fun to share some of the tips that I have for you of stretching your surprise just a little bit farther. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here.